Have you ever noticed how some things just never really go to plan? Not the way that you thought they would, the way that you planned them to go. Now, I know there are some things in life that we just make up as we go along and we throw it together, but there are things that really matter to us that we want to see turn out a certain way. So events in our life that we really care about, that we care so much about that we plan them, we do more planning, we do replanning, we keep planning them because they are so important. Weddings are one of those things that everyone wants to be the special day to go just according to plan. And the wedding industry in the UK has grown tremendously. Now we have a job called a wedding planner. Who knew that that would ever be a career 50 years ago? In the UK, the wedding industry is so big that in 2019, that was pre-pandemic, I know the wedding industry has been impacted by the pandemic, but pre-pandemic in 2019, the UK wedding industry was worth £14.7 billion. That is big, isn't it? And no wonder, because apparently the average money that's spent on a wedding, the average is between £6,000 and £30,000 on a wedding. Well, I remember our wedding day, we didn't spend that much on it, and we planned it a lot. We didn't have a wedding planner, but we had a plan. We had our day and our special day and the way that we wanted it to go. It was a great day. I love our wedding day. We love talking about it and remembering it, looking at photos or the video from it. So much went to plan, but there were things that we never could have planned. We never planned that two uninvited guests would turn up, assuming, of course, they'd be invited to the sit down. Of course they would, and then we had to find a way of accommodating them. We never planned that our evening buffet would be 2 hours later than it was meant to be because the caterers got held up. We didn't plan that the cake would be on the wrong stand, so it wasn't just the way that Karen had imagined it. We certainly didn't plan that our DJ would decide to use the evening as a bit of karaoke as he sung along to almost every other song at the disco. And I never planned that my car would be filled with camembert and kippers and all manner of other junk. And those of you who were at my wedding, I still remember what you did to me. I may be forgiving you soon. You know, we are in this series called The Big Story, and today's story is all about a wedding. And this story though, and this message for us today isn't just for those of you who might be planning a wedding or just done a wedding and all that sort of stuff. It's actually for all of us. It's all of us because we all have things in our life that we think will go a certain way. We maybe even try and plan them to be a certain way, or we hope they'll be a certain way, but things don't go to plan. Maybe your job and your career and what you thought you would do or what you thought you'd be doing right now isn't going to plan. Maybe the way your family is working, maybe the family that you thought you would have hasn't gone to plan. Maybe your health is not the way you ever imagined it would be and it's not gone to plan, or the relationships in your life are not where you thought they would be. Anything that you've got a plan for, you'll find something often goes wrong with it. And when some form of crisis occurs, hope can easily and quickly disappear. We start to ask ourselves, how do I know this is going to be okay? And when things go from bad to worse, we wonder, will it ever get any better? Our story from the Bible today speaks right into these questions. When crisis hits, we struggle to see how it will get better. Well, the story we're in hits a major setback. When the story that it's almost like we're writing a story. The story that we're writing, when it hits a major setback, we wonder how the story will end. But I want to say from the very start of this message, a truth from the Bible that we will hear in this message today is that there is a better story ahead of you. This week's big story is called Saving the Best Until Last. And as we're in this big story, we should orientate ourselves as to where we are in the big story. Last week, if you were with us, you'd have heard me talk from the book of Genesis. We were right near the beginning of the big story. And we are whizzing through the Bible now, getting to the New Testament. We are in the middle of our story. And so much has gone on before. All this stuff in the Old Testament, right from the very beginning in Genesis, as we were hearing last week, all through the Old Testament, is a story that's looking forward, looking to a day for a promised Messiah who is going to come and solve the sin problem. The problem that enters right at the very beginning of our story. A Messiah who will reconcile us back to God and bring us back into communion with him. And so although we're in the middle of this story, it's actually the beginning of a new story, the story of Jesus. And we are in the book of John. And we're in the book of John chapter 2, that's where we're at. So at the very beginning, or very near to the beginning of John's story, and you might think, well, this is a story about Jesus and we're near the beginning. And so, of course, we're going to be in the nativity bit. We're going to be in the shepherds and the wise men and angels on the hillsides and Mary and Joseph and a donkey. No, that is not the way that John tells the story. He includes none of that in his gospel. He decides to start his story in almost the same way that the book of Genesis starts the story. You may remember the opening words to the book of Genesis, which says, "In the beginning, God created." And John opens his gospel with, "In the beginning was the Word." And he echoes some of the wording from the beginning of the Bible. And what he's communicating to us, he's declaring, here is a story of a new beginning. Here is a story of a fresh start. Something new is beginning in my story, he's telling us, by using this type of wording and similar structure to the book of Genesis. We don't get Jesus' childhood. What we get is expectation. That's all that that's all that chapter 1 of John is all about. It's about expectation. It's about the fact that this is the word of God. This is the promised one. He's witnessed to by John the Baptist. John the Baptist is declaring, this is the one who will come after me, the Lamb of God who will take away the sin of the world. We see Jesus start to call his disciples. Who knows why they followed him? We've got no signs that Jesus performed, no miracles or anything, but he calls disciples and they follow him. And when you get to the end of chapter 1, there's actually a link back to last week's message where we was talking about Jacob's ladder and these angels coming up and down. And the last verse of chapter 1 is where Jesus is talking to Nathanael saying, you will see the angels coming up and down, ascending and descending on the Son of Man. That's how chapter 1 begins, and then it goes straight into a wedding. So let's read together from John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, as we read about this wedding and the way Jesus gives us hope for a better story. John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, and I'm reading from the English Standard Version. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus was also invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of the signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. You know, this story that many people have heard of, the idea that Jesus turned water into wine. This story, when you read it, is such a rich story. There's so much to take from this story. And I've got to say, I've loved studying this. I've discovered so much more in this story than I ever thought was there. Seeing what's going on at first glance, and then digging into it and seeing below the surface what's really going on. You know, it's true of any part of the Bible. When you read the Bible, realise that there is a great depth to discover. There's certainly easy stuff to understand at the surface level, but so often there's depth that we can discover. And just realise this, that these Gospels, that we're in John, but any one of the Gospels, they're not biographies. That's not their intention. They're not trying to write a life story. What they are meant to be is good news. That's what gospel means. It means good news. And each of the authors, in our case John, but each of the authors, they take what's happened with Jesus and they arrange the stories. They tell them in a particular way. They select, out of all of Jesus' life, they select certain stories and they word them in certain ways because they want to convey good news. They want to convey the gospel to us. And this story, the way that John tells it, John's the only gospel that records this, the way he tells it, he wants to tell us something. He wants to tell us that there is a better story ahead. Well, let me break down this story that we've just read into what I would call 3 different views. I want to look at the humanity of the story, just the normalness, just what normal life looks like, and just kind of read it at the surface level. I want to just look at the symbolism. There's immense symbolism embedded in this story. I want us to ask, what do we do with it? What's the application? How do we take what we've seen at the surface level and in the symbolism and say, what does that do for my life? Let's just take the reality that, sometimes we can read the Bible and forget that these are real stories. So let's think about the humanity of this story. Well, firstly, this is a wedding. Before we look any deeper, just realise we are reading a story about a wedding. This is a party, a social gathering. I know we haven't had many of those social gatherings, but in Jesus' day and not that long before our day, we'd have weddings and parties and social gatherings where many people would gather. And weddings in Jesus' day were very social things. Everybody would be invited to them. And Jesus is there. Jesus, the Messiah, Jesus, the Son of God, is at a party. Don't lose that. He's not preaching, he's not teaching, he's not healing people. He's just at a party with people, socialising, spending time, having a laugh, having a chat, catching up with people, spending time. He's bringing himself into this party and he's blessing it. He's blessing marriage. He's saying, this is where I want to be. Socialising with his friends. And he's not even the special guest. We don't get this thing that Jesus was invited as a special guest. It's almost like Jesus' mother was invited, so well, you can bring along your children. Oh, and also they can bring their friends. And it's like, Jesus isn't the special guest at this party. Have you ever been to a wedding where there's something going wrong at the wedding? Some form of disaster. Maybe it's bad food. Maybe it's not enough food. Maybe it's like our experience, a bad DJ. Maybe there's just some speech that's super awkward when people say things they're not really meant to say in the wedding speeches. Ever been at a disaster wedding? You know what happens when you go to a wedding when something like that happens? People talk. You want to tell someone the next day in the office or wherever you are, go, what did you do at the weekend? Well, I went to this wedding. How was it? Well, I've got to tell you, people talk about things that go wrong in these things. And in this culture of Jesus's day, people really talk. This matters big time. Weddings were a big thing, even bigger than we're used to in our society. These were a big occasion, and your standing in the community, your reputation is set by these occasions. And the shame of running out of wine, we should not underestimate. It would have just struck a chord with everybody. It would have sent a message to all those people in the community who've all attended this wedding and there's not been enough to drink. It would say things like, maybe you can't provide for your family. Maybe you're not sufficient enough to do that. Maybe you don't care for your daughter or your son-in-law enough to be able to provide for them. Maybe you just can't plan anything. Maybe you're just a rubbish host. Maybe you just don't care about your guests. It would communicate these things. And surely Jesus who knows all things, knows the words we're going to say before we say them, the omnipotent God who sees everything, surely Jesus would have known there was a problem. Most guests wouldn't know there was a problem until there was a problem. We get the impression that this wine running out is behind the scenes, but Mary is on the inside. Maybe she was a good friend of the mother of the bride or a good friend of the person who was organising it, I don't know, but Mary knew something was going wrong. She not only knows, but she cares about it, and she also knows where to go to get it fixed. Imagine the headline in the newspaper the next day was going to be crisis at the wedding in Cana. That's what Mary could see coming up here. This is what everyone's going to be saying. There was crisis at the wedding in Cana. But there is a better story ahead. When Jesus approached, Jesus says, what's this got to do with me? It's like Jesus is pushing back. I mean, is Jesus really interested in the practical part of our lives? When Jesus is pushing back, his problem is not that he doesn't care. Jesus is actually really concerned with timing. He says, this isn't the hour for something public. This isn't the time or the place for me to draw attention to myself. This is not the right time in my ministry to draw a crowd. But it is time for Jesus to work behind the scenes, where few will see it. And we in this story get to see behind the scenes. As this wedding party is playing out, we get to see behind the scenes how this major crisis is being averted, and others wouldn't know. But also as it's playing out, the disciples know what's going on. We read that at the end of the story, that the disciples, it increases their faith. They believe in Jesus. They followed this story along. And I just had this picture. I wonder what's going on with the disciples. They're all sitting around. Jesus is there and they're socializing. And then Jesus' mother comes over and starts to bother them. And then Jesus starts to get involved in some business to do with water and jars and things. And just to hear this conversation, it's almost like two of the disciples are talking to each other going, what was that about? I don't know. Jesus' mum come over to him. Apparently they're running out of wine. Really? What's that got to do with Jesus? I don't know. He's gone off to do something. What's he doing? And all the disciples are watching. What's Jesus up to? What's he doing? They're getting water. Hang on, I thought they'd run out of wine. Yeah, but what are they getting water for? Can you imagine the pondering and the wondering that's going on as water gets filled into jars? What's going on? What is Jesus up to? What are they doing? They're pouring out the water now? Just these disciples are watching and wondering. And they have amazement as they see the first miracle that Jesus performs. Did you see that? Wine was served. Did you hear how the host of the party spoke about it? Like it was the best wine ever. I saw what happened. All they did was put water in. I saw what happened. How did Jesus do that? They were amazed. They have the inside track on this story, and so do we. But let's not lose the reality, the humanity of this story. Just think about this for a moment. We read it earlier, but I wonder if it just passed you by. They filled 6 jars, 6 stone jars. It says that each of these jars will contain 20 to 30 gallons of water. I don't know if you can visualize that. That is a lot of water. That's 120 to 150 gallons of water that needs to be collected. Where's the tap? We're not in a day and age where someone could just turn the tap, connect the hose up, just wait, we're going to fill up these jars soon. That is not the way society worked. It's a few verses we trip over, but just think about the effort and the time and the energy that needs to go on. And all the time, all these people collecting water, I don't know if it was from a well or where they'd got all this water from, but they're collecting water and filling up stone jars. Can you imagine, again, the humanity? If you were one of those, what are we doing? We're collecting water. What are we collecting water for? Well, this man says that's what we're supposed to do, and I don't know what's going to happen. All that energy and effort collecting 150 to 180 gallons of water. For what? For what? I wonder really, is the miracle that the water was turned into wine? Or is the miracle that people obeyed this idea of collecting 120 to 180 gallons of water, expecting something mysterious and magical and amazing to happen? That's quite miraculous in itself. Their response to this sign for the disciples as they saw what Jesus did, their response to this sign was belief. They'd already followed Jesus, but when they saw this happening, they're like, this is out of this world. It's interesting, the whole of John's gospel is about belief. That's what he says at the end of the book in John chapter 20, 30 to 31. He says, there are many things that happened. We can't write them all down, but I'll write this down so that you would believe these many signs that Jesus did. John's intention, just as Jesus' intention, was for belief. But let's look below the surface, below this exterior story of people at a wedding and a party and people collecting gallons and gallons of water and disciples watching it. Let's look at the symbolism of this story. And I've got to tell you, for me, this is where the story gets really exciting. I think this gets so exciting because there's so much symbolism in this story. And nothing is by accident in this. John does not write this casually. Everything inspired and breathed by the Holy Spirit has a purpose here. There's no accidental timing to this amazing miracle. It's a message in itself. What do we read in verse 1 of chapter 2? It says, on the third day. Where have we heard that before? Where have you and I know about what happens on the third day? John is pointing and putting references in this story that say, get ready. This is a story that is pointing forward to a better story ahead. Another crisis that led to a much better outcome. The crisis of the Son of Man being arrested and put on a cross that led to a much better outcome. This is not just accidental timing. No wonder Jesus says, my hour has not yet come, but John knows Jesus' hour is coming. And in his book, he's going to unveil and reveal how Jesus' hour looks and what he does with that. And this is no coincidence that it's at a wedding where Jesus does this amazing miracle. Jesus, the author of marriage, the author of the covenant of love between two people. And Jesus, who the Bible describes as the bridegroom to his bride, the church. I wonder if you've ever been to a wedding when you're in the middle of planning yours. It's great to go and enjoy someone else's wedding, but inside you're thinking about, how's mine going to be? I know it's a strange thing to think about, but Jesus is looking forward to the wedding day, to the wedding to come, the day of the marriage of the feast of the Lamb. The marriage feast of the Lamb, this celebration of his bride and the bridegroom coming together. And Jesus is at a wedding. I truly believe it's not passed him by. He's there in the human form of wedding and marriage and anticipating the marriage that's to come, anticipating that reconciliation as he will prepare his bride through his own death on the cross. And this isn't just an ordinary miracle. This is a sign. It's really interesting. If you look through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke, they all talk about miracles. It comes from this Greek word dunamis. It's about power, like where we get the word dynamite come from. John never uses the word dunamis. He never talks about miracles. John describes similar things or the same things in their Gospels and doesn't call them miracles. He calls them signs. These are a sign, like a signpost. They are pointing to Jesus. They're pointing to who the Messiah truly is. Jesus isn't just displaying his miracle power when he is turning water into wine. He is showing a sign of his glorification to come. The glorious day when he is going to be most displayed at his most glorious. That's why he says, my hour has not yet come. And these are no ordinary jars either. I don't know if you saw it in the passage earlier. They're telling us something. These jars, they're not just 6 jars that have about 20 to 30 gallons worth of liquid within them. You have to wonder why, if Jesus is going to do this miracle or this sign, why didn't he just get them to fill the jugs that they were going to give to the cupbearer, to the man who was organising the wedding? They could have put water into that and then poured it out. But no, Jesus goes through this process of filling these jars and then drawing from the jars and then taking that to the wine server. Why put this bit in the middle? Well, Jesus takes this symbol of Jewish purification. That's what these jars were used for. These jars were used to collect water that then Jewish people would use to purify themselves, to cleanse themselves from their sin before they would enter the temple. That's what these jars were used for. They had a specific purpose to purify people. And Jesus chooses by no accident to take the jars that the Jewish people would use for purification to symbolise and show a greater purification to come through his own blood. He is the better purification. It says that he washes us whiter than the snow. The word of God says that the sacrifice of bulls and rams, they can't ever wash us clean, but the sacrifice made by Jesus will purify us beyond all recognition. We will be whiter than the snow. Our sin will be cast as far as the east is from the west. That is the purification that Jesus brings. It's no surprise or coincidence that he uses purification jars. And it's interesting, they're empty. These jars are empty to be filled for a reason. These jars, these symbols of Jewish purification are empty. And they speak of the emptiness of religion trying to make us better by the works that we do and the sacrifice we make. These are symbols of being made right through our acts, and they're symbols that show that those acts of trying to make us right are empty. It's like when Jesus spoke of new wine. He spoke about a new wine coming, a new covenant. He said, you can't put that new wine into old wineskins. He is pouring out his new wine into these symbols. It's really interesting as well. Moses, a redeemer of the people, taking the Israelites out of the promised land, the first miracle that Moses performed was when he turned the water into blood. And this first miracle that Jesus performs is Jesus turning water into wine. The old covenant spoke of blood and sacrifice, but Jesus, because he has made the sacrifice, he's not talking about our sacrifice, he's talking about wine, joy, Holy Spirit, life to the full. This is the message that Jesus is conveying. And again, all this symbolism in there, the symbolism of the liquid that we're talking about here, the water and the wine, that's no mistake either. These symbols of being baptized, the act of baptism, submitting our life to God, being reborn. This symbol of wine, the symbol that Jesus uses as the symbol of his blood, cleansed by his blood. This wine that Jesus shared with his disciples. And what do we read when we get to the crucifixion story? That Jesus, when he is pierced on the cross, blood and water flows. There is so much parallelism going on here between the message of Jesus. There's so much symbolism that points to the fact that he is the greater miracle, that there is a greater story to come. This miracle might be amazing in Cana, but there is a much better story to come. This is John pointing forward. Read the story, but he's going, get ready. There's a sign here. I'm pointing you towards a better story to come. So what? So what? So what do we do with all this? What's the point of this? It's great hearing the story and thinking about how amazing it was, and it's great thinking about the symbolism, but what do we do? What is the application of the story? Well, what do you do when crisis hits? What do you do when you hit a crisis in your life? Something that doesn't go to plan, something that rocks you off course. Do you seek to solve it? Fix it, use your own human strength to try and put it right, just like these jars of purification, the effort that we would go through to put that situation right? Do we go out and buy the wine, try and look in the shops, do we try and solve the problem, or do we take it to Jesus? That's the choice we have when crisis hits. Do we try and solve it ourselves, or do we take our problems to Jesus? When you have a self-help religion, one that says, I will make myself right, I will put all the effort into making myself holy, I will pay the price. When you do that, when crisis hits, you've only one place to look, which is here. But when you have a Christian faith, a true faith in trusting in Jesus, where you go, I'm dependent upon you, Jesus, for everything, that means that when crisis hits, Jesus, I'm dependent upon you to solve this as well. You better stop doing what you're doing, and like Mary said, do whatever he tells you. It's great, isn't it, this idea? Stop what you're doing and do whatever he tells you. It's easy said and not as easily done. But Jesus actually embeds within the story, he provides with us some really great clues about how we go about doing what he says. That's what happened. Mary says to the servants, she just points them to Jesus and says, do whatever he tells you to do. And what Jesus tells them to do, I believe, is what he tells us to do as well. For how we deal with our crisis in life. For how we do what Jesus says so that we see new wine. Just read again verse 7 and verse 8, and I've underlined some words here. Just read what happens there. This is after she says, do whatever he tells you. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. These 3 steps about filling, drawing and taking. So I think Jesus points us to something very profound for us to do whatever he tells us to do. This step 1 is fill up. Fill up. Like Jesus said, fill the jars with water. Fill up. Fill up your life. Spend time preparing with God. Even though, I mean, just think they filled up these jars. All they did was put water in it. So many times we get disheartened the time we spent with God and we go, where did they get me? What was that for? Because we're not seeing the wine yet. We're just seeing the water being poured in. But I want to tell you, get filled up with His Spirit. This water, this living water. Jesus said, you won't thirst again. Come and get living water from me. He pours into us His living water as we spend time with Him and say, fill me up, Lord. Fill me up. Corinthians says that we're like jars of clay with a treasure within. I spoke about that a couple of months ago. We're like these jars saying, fill me up, Lord. Fill me with your water, and not half measures. Do you notice in the story they filled it right up to the brim? Every bit of this jar, 6 jars up to the brim, full up. And just remember what we said. It's a lot of water with no tap or hose. That would have taken them quite a bit of time. That would have taken them a lot of time. And I want to say to you, as I'm encouraging you, step 1, fill up with God, spend time with Him. It won't come quickly. It will take time, just like filling those jars. Imagine if you were going and getting water, bringing it back, tipping it in, go off and get water, bring it back, tip it in. That is the daily habit of spending time with God, being filled up with Him. And I acknowledge, I'll tell you this from my own experience, if you've not done this before, you can spend time with God and sometimes you're like, I don't know what I'm doing this for. Where is this getting me? Promise you that doubt can come in sometimes. Just like filling those jars with water, you're looking and going, all I'm seeing is water being poured in. You're yet to see the miracle. But let me tell you, you won't get the miracle unless you get the fill up. It won't happen. The first step is spending time in His presence daily, regularly, when it's hard, when it's easy, when you feel like it, when you don't feel like it, getting filled up and full of His Spirit. Fill up is step 1. Then what does He tell them to do? After they've filled up, after they've spent time, in our analogy, in our time with the presence of God, as they have filled up these jars with water, what are they told to do? They're told to draw some out. Step 2 is draw from. Draw from that time in the prayer closet, that time quietly with God, that time spent on your knees or on your face before God, even though it's not making sense. And remember this story, when they go to draw from that jar and they look in the jug that they're about to serve out, they're still seeing water. They're still seeing water. We haven't seen any transformation yet. And I want to tell you, when you spend time with God, God says, I want you to now draw from that time. There is a better story yet to come. You haven't seen it yet, but there is a better story to come. So make plans to move out in faith. And I am really trying to learn this lesson so much at the moment. We have this story about our dog, about, probably a number of you know, Lucas had a problem with his leg. And we were in between the vet telling us that we want to refer you to the specialist hospital for dogs where he'd been before with a broken leg, and the days waiting to find that out. And then we're looking and going, how much is it going to cost us? How's it going to impact our holiday? And I remember having this conversation with Karen saying, I'm believing that it's not broken. I'm believing that it's not going to end up in a big bill. I'm believing that he's not going to not be able to come on a holiday with us. I'm believing that he's going to be able to walk fine for our holiday. I was drawing from the well. I couldn't see it yet. I was speaking things that I didn't fully buy into. I'm speaking them because I'm going to draw from the well. Every time, just remember this as well, right? They would have served that wine to the cupbearer, to the person organising the wine, and he speaks to the bridegroom and says, this is amazing. And they'd have served it. Then they'd have to go and get some more. Can you imagine? They go with their jug, they go back to the big jar, and what do they see in the jar? More water. It's not changed into wine in the big jar. It's still water, and they still draw the water. Imagine that faith every time they go, I'm going to keep drawing from this. I'm going to keep drawing from this well. I'm going to keep drawing from this jar. I'm going to believe this. Everything you are learning in the filling up stage, in the quiet space, in the daily reading and the waiting on God, put it into practice. When you feel God speak to you, He doesn't speak for the fun of it. He speaks for us to put it into action. I know I'm jumping around the Bible a bit here, but in the story in Matthew where Jesus talks about the house built upon the sand and the house built upon the rock, he says, building your house upon the rock is not just knowing what Jesus is saying, it's putting it into practice. The wise man puts into action what he's learned. So take the filling up where you receive from God, where you spend time with God and you don't know where it's getting you, what it's for, but you're spending time in his presence, and draw from that and go, I'm going to move out, I'm going to make plans. I'm going to take this jug and I'm going to move into action even though I've yet to see the miracle, I've yet to see the transformation, but I'm doing what he tells me to do. And then we get to step 3. Step 3 in verse 8 says, take it to the master. And in this context, the master is not take it to God. It's take it to the ones we're serving. Step 3 is take it. Take it to the ones we're serving. Take it to the world around us. And then as we take what we have got from God in our infilling time, in our quiet time with him, as we put it into practice and act upon it, as we go and take it to the world around us, that is where the wine appears. When we put it into action, that's where the miracle occurs. I don't know if you noticed this, but Jesus did not fill the jars. He did not serve the wine. He didn't touch it. Where did the miracle happen? The miracle happened in the hands of those who stepped out in faith. That's where the miracle happens. It's the same as the story of the feeding of 5,000. You go read about that. Jesus prays over the bread and then he gives it to the disciples and says, you go feed people. And it's in their hands the multiplication happens. As we are poured into and as we are poured out, he turns that water into wine. Jesus can turn anything from nothing into something. He can take anyone and turn them from no one to someone. Your past or even your present is not the end. There is a better story ahead. I so want you to draw comfort and strength from this sign, from this story, from this thing that we're familiar with. Many people know that Jesus turned water into wine. And I want you to take that memory, that I know this thing about Jesus turned water into wine. I want you to draw strength from it and draw hope from it. You may well be holding something that you have lost hope about. Maybe something you've got right now where you have lost hope about it. When you feel like the wine is running out, when you feel like the jar is empty, fill up. Fill up with God, draw from it and take it to the world around you. This is what Jesus said to do. When Mary says, do whatever he tells you, that's what he says. When you see the wine running out and the jar empty, do what he tells you to do. Fill up with him. Draw from the strength of his word. Draw from the truth. When it's not making sense, when you go, I don't know where this is going me yet, and go act on it, and you will see the turning around, the transformation from that water into wine. There's a crisis before the miracle, a crisis before the breakthrough. When the jar's empty and all you have is water, get ready. Stop saying it's only going to get worse. There is a better story ahead. It might get worse before it gets better, but it will get better. That is the truth. That is the promise. The best is usually first. That's what the cupbearer said. That's what he said. He says, how come you've got this good wine now? Normally we serve the good wine first and then it gets worse. No, it's not getting from good to bad and from bad to worse. It's getting better and better. This is God's way. It's woven throughout the Bible. There was a first covenant, the covenant of the law, and it got better. Jesus was the better covenant. And when Jesus came, we thought it couldn't get any better. Jesus says it's best for you that I go, so the Holy Spirit gets sent, so the gospel could go forth. It gets better and better. And there is a better eternity to come as well. This is not the end. There's an eternity to come where there's no pain and no tears. There's only joy, and there's a marriage feast, and there's wine ever flowing, and streets paved with gold, and trees with the healing for the nations, and a river of life flowing. There is a better story to come. It's not all downhill from here. It gets better and better. And even what about now in COVID? With all we've gone through, whatever concerns you about the last year, however it's impacted you personally, or your home, or your job, or the church, or health, However you look at it. God says the same things he says throughout his word. You know, in Haggai, he says, the latter glory of this house will be the greater than the former. He says it's going to get better. When he spoke to Job, he said, even though you started with little, you'll end up with much. That is his promise. And I know it's hard to believe when you run out of what you've got. When you're running out of the wine, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe when it's being poured in and what's being poured in doesn't seem to be what's needed. Don't look at the wine that's run out. Don't look at what's empty in your life. Don't look at this empty jar. Even when it's filled with water and you think, well, that's not the wine. Don't look at that. Look at Jesus and what he can do and do whatever he tells you. I want to say as well, because I never know who's listening on these messages, I want to say there's the biggest crisis ever that can happen in our life. It's the moment we realise that the life we're living is empty, that it's not getting us anywhere. The life we've lived is not getting us anywhere, that we've tried doing things through our own efforts and we discover that we can't make it. I can never be good enough. The biggest crisis any human being can experience is realising our sin and realising the hopelessness in our sin. Jesus wants to fill you with his water. And he wants to pour you out like wine. He wants to transform who you was into who he's calling you to be. There's a better story ahead of you. If you've reached that point where you go, I don't know what I'm living for. Jesus says, I've got a purpose for you. I've got a way for you to live. There is a better story ahead. Let me fill you up with my water and let me transform it and pour you out as rich wine to the world around you. We can pray with you today if that's you. We can pray with you. If you're watching this live, there'll be a button you can push. We'd love to talk to you and tell you more about Jesus and lead you in that. If you're watching this online, just get hold of it. You know, you're watching it later and it's not live, you're watching it on YouTube or something, get hold of us. We will pray with you and lead you through that. Reach out to Jesus. Do not miss the opportunity. Do not miss the opportunity for him to fill you up and for you to be poured out like wine. Well, I want to end my message with a song. I know we're probably going to a song, but I want to just play a song. As I've been preparing this message, I've been singing this song lots. It's a song that we know. And it speaks about water turned into wine. And what it says in the chorus is this reminder that our God is greater. Our God is stronger. God, there's no one like you. And as I wrap up this message, I want us to just focus on those words and just to center ourselves in that realization that Jesus, you can do amazing things. Even when we're broken, even when we're empty, even when the wine is running out in our life and the crisis is going to occur, Jesus can step in. Water you turned into wine, open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you, none like you. Into the darkness we shine, out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you, none like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Water you turned into wine, open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you, none like you. Into the darkness you shine, out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you, none like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. Oh God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. And God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? What could stand against? What could stand against? What could stand against? Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? If our God is with us, then what could stand against? What could stand against? What could stand against? What could stand against? Water you turned into wine.